All right, and we are recording. So, John Vervaeke, thank you for connecting. Let's start there. Actually, how do we pronounce your name correctly for everyone?
Vervaeke.
Vervaeke. Okay. So, John Vervaeke, thank you so much for taking the time to connect today. John Vervaeke, for those who don't know, he's a PhD. He is an award-winning professor of psychology, cognitive science, and Buddhist psychology at the University of Toronto, and John has a big series coming out called Walking the Philosophical Silk Road. Did I get that all right? Are there any other accolades that I should mention?
Well, people might know me from my other two series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis and After Socrates. Yes.
Got it. Yeah. And you have a big YouTube series on that as well.
Yep. Yes.
So tell us about your life, John, as early as you want to start. What ignited your interest in meaning? Like, how did you get interested in these topics? And walk us through the evolution of your life that may have led to that interest.
So I was something of a precocious child, but also very shy. Um, and I only found out later that I was the result of my mother and my father having an affair and breaking up two marriages. So my mom had a very um, ambivalent relationship to me. In one sense, I represented her sin. She grew up in a fundamentalist Christian family. But on the other hand, um, I was precocious. I seemed to have a kind of potential. It's hard to talk about oneself this way. I had a kind of potential that she started to, I guess, to her, was to some degree redemptive. I mean, it couldn't have all been a mistake because this child is, um, you know, uh, very different than all the other children in the entire extended family. So she,
What do you mean by different?
I was much more intellectually inclined, much more. Um, there's a thing in psychology called need for cognition. I would seek out problems, try to solve them on my own, explore ideas, very interested in science very early on. My mother, in fact, told me when I was a young kid that I was born with an old soul. Um, and and so I would um, very deeply pore over things. She said from a very young age she could leave me alone by myself and I would entertain myself for hours, which was
What would you do?
unusual. Well, when I was very young and I was very, very interested in dinosaurs, and I would set up entire worlds of dinosaurs. And then as I got a bit older, I got very interested in ancient history, and I would draw huge maps and pretend that there was armies moving across and various civilizations and things like that. Um, and I, I I was given sort of two signals by my mom. One was she was very encouraging of all of this. She really liked this about me. She encouraged me to explore and to learn and to educate myself as much as I could. But she also was very, very concerned that um, I I adopt the form of fundamentalist Christianity that she was very strongly identified with. She was, of course, trying to get rid of her guilt, and to some degree, she projected that onto me. So I got this very mixed signal. Uh, and what happened is that fundamentalist Christianity, after a lot of reflection and a lot of work and therapy, was quite traumatizing for me. There were times in my life where I had what would now be called a traumatic experience because of them. Um,
Like
uh,
what?
one, which doesn't sound like much from an adult's perspective, but if you put it into the perspective of a 10-year-old, I hope you'll appreciate it. I came home one day from school. Oh, that was when you could still walk home by yourself from school, and we weren't so afraid of things. And I got home, and something that had never happened before happened. There was nobody home. There was nobody home. And I was convinced that the rapture had occurred. Everybody had been taken to heaven. I was clearly a damned sinner, and I don't mean that in the curse sense. I mean that in the theological sense. I was a damned sinner left behind, and the Antichrist and his minions were coming to get me at any moment. And that was one of the maybe the single most terrifying moment of my life. I've lain in a hospital looking up into my doctor's face consequences. I had a very serious infection, and I realized, oh, they think I'm going to die. That was scary. But that moment when I came home and I thought the rapture had occurred and I was now left in the world of the Antichrist was the most terrifying moment of my life, hands down. And that's just one of many e- events like that happened to me. Um, so,
What's the worst thing that happened to you? And the reason I ask is because I feel like to really have such a deep search for meaning, I have a hypothesis that there's been other tough things as well.
well, that one was pretty bad. I don't know if there's a single one. The other one is I used to read my Bible daily. I'm grateful for that. I've read the Bible 7 times, studied it quite deeply. I'm glad for that. But I came upon the passage Jesus says at one point, and it's in one of the epistles about the unforgivable sin. And of course, I wondered what this was because it was very non-specific. And I got into a tremendous anxiety that had I committed the sin, was thinking that the sin, and it was just destroying me. My mother realized something really bad was going on. Like she could tell I was terribly distraught. Um, so she took me to the pastor of our church to help me, and he gave me the most platitudinous answers that even I think I was 12 then, a 12-year-old would recognize as absolutely platitudinous and useless. And I never felt so alone. I mean, here was here was this institution that gave me this distress, put me into this deep thing, and then couldn't offer me any reasonable, reliable way out of it.
And how did your journey then continue into where you are today, teaching and educating about philosophy, meaning, and consciousness?
Well, what happened is I abandoned that Christianity in my teenage years, and I became very sort of antagonistic and not even an atheist, sort of an anti-theist, very anti-religion, very anti-Christianity. Um, and of course, I turned to the world of science for that. But I was also reading some great literature at the time. Robertson Davies' book, it would introduce me to um, Jungian psychology. I read Hermann Hesse, introduced me to Eastern philosophy. I read Roger Zelazny's Lord of Light, which introduced me to Eastern mythology. Um, and so all of these things were setting up a contrast in my mind. I was still hungry for the transcendent. I was still hungry for that sense of sacredness. I was still hungry for a sense of guidance. And at first I thought I could be that to myself, a common illusion that I think many people go through at some point in their life. And I realized that was not the case. And so I was very much in my own personal meaning crisis, very profoundly. And I went to university and I took a first year course on philosophy because of I had taken that, read the Hermann Hesse and things like that. And lo and behold, I encountered the figure of Socrates. And Socrates gave me an alternative model that there was a way of pursuing transcendence that could be bound up with being a rational, virtuous person. There was there were possibility of mystical experience, and I fell in love with Socrates, and that is still part of who and what I am. Unfortunately, as I went on, the topic of wisdom and the emulation of Socrates was not part of academic philosophy. I still pursued academic philosophy because I liked the skills it was giving me, but that hunger for the cultivation of wisdom was not being addressed. So when I was in my MA, and I dropped out for a year, and I went down the street to where they were teaching Tai Chi Chuan and meditation and contemplation and Vipassana and metta, and I started doing what I would now call an ecology of practices. And I got very interested in that, and
Wow.
yeah, and that was starting to feed my hunger for wisdom. And then and then I noticed that there was this new emerging science, cognitive science, that was doing asking the kind of questions and turning towards these issues of meaning. And so I went back and actually did an honors bachelor degree, Bachelor of Science in cognitive science. And increasingly the cognitive science and the practices came together. And I started making connections between them. I was, I think, the first person at the University of Toronto to teach about mindfulness in an academic setting, to start teaching about wisdom in an academic setting, because psychologists and philosophers and cognitive scientists were now talking about all of these things and starting to talk about altered states of consciousness. And that deepened and deepened, and that has only grown. And as I started to talk about those things and how they were helping me alleviate these challenges around meaning and get a deeper understanding of what that meaning is, my students' eyes would light up. And Evan Thompson was supposed to teach a course at the University of Toronto called Buddhism and Cognitive Science. He couldn't teach it, and they said, who will teach it? Well, he said, John could teach it. And I started teaching that course, and that's the course that turned into the argument about the meaning crisis. It started all of my work on the nature of wisdom, altered states of consciousness, mystical experiences, meaning in life, etc. That's it.
Wow, amazing. Let's talk about all those topics. So,
Okay.
the meaning crisis. What is the meaning crisis?
So we have to get clear about what's meant by the meaning there. There's a metaphor being used. Sentences have semantic meaning, right? Is that they fit together in some way, so they fit our mind to the world such that we can determine the truth, right? And before I can determine the truth, a sentence has to be meaningful to you, or to me. If you don't know what a sentence means, you can't determine if it's true or false. So what's the metaphor? Well, there's something about our lives, they hang together in a certain way that they fit us to the world, so we're in contact with what's real. And that's what psychologists call meaning in life. It's a sense of being connected to something that has a reality and a value beyond your egocentric concerns. Susan Wolf, in her book Meaning in Life and Why It Matters, talks about this in terms of people need to feel something, feel connected to something that's bigger than themselves, which is another metaphor. You can there's three questions you can ask to determine whether or not you have meaning in life. It's what do you want to exist even if you don't? How really real is that? And how much of a difference do you make to it now? If you got a good answer to all of those, you have something that's giving you meaning in life. And meaning in life is what sustains you even when things are really, really bad. So, for
Can we
example,
define meaning a bit more? So you're saying
yeah,
those are the three questions to ask to know if you have meaning.
yeah.
What is meaning?
Well, meaning is that sense of connectedness I was talking about.
Is
And
it so how do you define that in a sentence? Meaning is a sense of connectedness? Is there a way to succinctly encapsulate what it is, or is it mean something different to different people? Or
well, the content will vary, but there's sort of four dimensions. I hesitate to give like a definition because definitions are they come very, very late in science, not very, very early. Um, so there's four dimensions. One is, do you have a purpose? Do you have an overarching goal? A lot of people think that that's equivalent to meaning. Having purpose is important, but it's not sufficient for meaning in life. It's not the most important dimension. The next is coherence. Your world has to make sense to you. It can't be absurd. Your world can't be absurd. You can't. It can't strike you as one in which things ultimately don't make sense to you. There has to be significance and mattering. These are two aspects of the same thing. You need to feel connected to something that is real. You don't. You have to feel a sense of belonging. You can't feel alienated. You can't feel that things are superficial or largely bullshit. These are the opposite. And the things that you regard as the standard by which you judge other things to be bullshit and to be superficial and to be alienating or absurd are the things that give you meaning in life.
so in terms of what constitutes meaning, and I'm sorry I'm drilling down so deeply
No,
into it. I just think this is
that's fine.
this is a
Please.
fundamental pillar before we continue. So in terms of what constitutes meaning, I think you said four things. I got three. So having a purpose or goal, like a mission. The
Yep.
second is coherence.
Yep.
So I mean coherence. I'm not entirely sure like what the bounds of that are, but the word coherence means to be able to understand and see things. And
Well,
then
let me give you a quick one example about that to try
yeah,
and clarify it a little bit. Um, Absurdity is about a clash of perspectives. So you have your own personal level perspective, but if you have a cosmic perspective that makes your personal level perspective seem insignificant, shallow, unimportant, that would be a sense of absurdity.
so not having a sense of absurdity.
Yes, exactly.
So and we're calling that
That's
coherence. I
called
mean,
coherence. Yeah.
there's more we could unpack there, but I'll continue forward. So, and then the next thing is significance slash belonging,
Mattering. Mattering.
mattering,
Yeah.
mattering. So those are three things. You said there was a fourth.
Oh, well, they were 4. Sorry,
Mhm.
I was a little too rapid there. They were considered
Yeah.
4, with significance and mattering being 2 separate things.
Mhm.
But
I
very
see.
recent research has now shown they're just 2 different sides of the same phenomena.
Got it. So in terms of the meaning crisis, we think, okay, what is meaning? It's broken into uh, a purpose, goal, coherence, and significance. And how do we know if something is meaningful or not? The three questions you posed were: do you want it to exist even if you're
Yep,
dead?
that's right.
The second is how real is it?
Yes,
And the third is how much difference do you make to it now? So
that's right.
can you give us an example? Like what's something that's meaningful to you and walk us through how it achieves the three things that constitute meaning. So purpose, coherence, significance, and the three attributes that you mentioned that you want it to exist after you're dead. How real?
Well, I'm gonna
Real-
choose one that I share with you because I
yeah.
think that would be very helpful. And I wanna
Mhm.
choose one that's a clear example of where something is very meaningful, but it our subjective well-being, our how well we're doing physically and psychologically and financially is actually undermined significantly. Is having a child. When you have a child, your health goes down, your longevity goes down, your one of your most important relationships is put under strain. You don't get enough sleep. You're always wet for some reason. You're under stress. There's alarms going off. Your finances are worried, and you're getting sick all the time. And so, why would
I
anybody?
actually felt some relief getting this validation from you, but I actually felt good to hear that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
well,
as you said, as you were saying,
yeah, well, I mean, having a child is like being in a shipwreck. And then, well, why do you do it? Well, because my children answer those questions. I want them to exist when I do not exist. I want that profoundly, right? I think of them as really real. I don't think they're illusions or bullshit or right. But if you have to ask me, what is Touchstone real? They're real for me. How much of a difference do I make to them? Well, ask them. But they tell me I'm a good dad, which means I make a significant difference to them. So that's meaning in life. That's why you have a child because it's one of the ways in which we get meaning in life. Now, that's not the only thing for me, but I was using one that I think a lot of people could understand. And it's a good example because it shows you how meaning in life is so sustaining, even when your sort of sense of well-being and contentedness with your life is going down dramatically. And that is the function of meaning in life. It keeps you going, even when things are frustrating, when you're failing, when people have disappointed you, when you think like things are futile. That's what meaning in life does for you. That's how it operates.
so it keeps you going. It reminds me of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. What's your opinion on that book?
Well, that logotherapy, the meaning he's
Yeah.
talking about is exactly the meaning in life that I'm talking about here. Um, and um, and logotherapy is about trying to help people who have lost that sense of meaning, even though they might have everything else going well in their life. Oh, but also, of course, because he did it while he was in the camp, the concentration camp, that search for the logos, that kind of living connectedness and meaning, uh, also helped sustain people in the most worst situations. So even when people get the fulfillment of the American dream, or even if they're in Auschwitz, the answer is Meaning in life.
And that's what keeps people going. So the example you gave, John, is your kids. You said your kids check those boxes. You want them to exist even when you're dead. They're very real, and you make a big difference to them now.
Yeah.
So the second point is the one I have a question about. It's, you know, how real something is. So what's an example that checks of something that someone might think of as meaning, but only checks the first and third boxes. So in other words, they want that thing to exist after they're dead. They make a big difference to it now, but it's not real, or it's not very real. What's an example of that?
Yeah. So the difficulty is when people usually, and this is an important thing we want to discuss, because mattering, being connected to something real, turns out to be the most important factor. When people find out that something is not real, that usually undermines the meaning in life it gives for them. So it's hard to come up
I
with an
see.
example. But what I can do is show you at the point
So
where it pivots and maybe
maybe,
get you
or maybe that's kind of the foundational thing. It's like, is it
right.
real? And then from there, it's about, well, some things are real, but you don't care if it exists after you're dead, or
Right. Yeah.
some things
Yeah.
are real, but you're not making a difference to it now. Got it.
That's right. That's right. So I will regularly ask my students in my class, how many of you are in satisfying romantic relationships, which is one of the things our culture tells us can replace religion for us, which is largely not true. But I get a certain number of them put up their hands, and then I say, of those people that put up their hands, how many of you would want to know if your partner was cheating on you, even if that meant the total destruction of the relationship? And 99% of them put their hands up. Notice they want to destroy this thing that is giving them so much meaning because it's not real. It was a fraud. It was a fake. It didn't have depth to it. Right. So, yeah, I
But
am of the opinion
so,
that
wait,
that
so,
can
so, so,
really.
so, so are you saying that something you find meaningful you would not want to know if there's a problem with it?
Ah, no, that's exactly the point. This is where we get into sort of existential decisions. When people are confronted with that, as I did in the class, they reliably choose to let go of that meaning in life because doesn't have that connectedness to reality. Yes,
No, you're saying that you're saying the fact that they would want to know that a partner is cheating on them and that would hurt the relationship means that the
destroy it. Yeah.
relation would destroy it, means that the relationship was never meaningful to begin with, right?
Well, that's the thing. That's exactly the thing. That's an interesting question.
So I guess I,
Uh,
gue- I guess I guess my follow up to that is, are you saying that for something to be truly meaningful, nothing could change your mind about it?
I think for something to be truly meaningful, you couldn't. And when this is why we have this word, you couldn't realize that it's an illusion. That you couldn't come to understand that it doesn't properly exist.
But I do think there's a lot of people who, they love their partner and they say, "This is my life partner. I love them. No matter what they do, I'm going to stay with them because this is
And that's
I'm
not true. And we know it's not true.
you know oh hmm.
Yeah,
So
okay. And if I'll stay with them no matter what. If they tried to kill you,
hmm.
nope. If you
So
found them cheating and had a whole other family over there with another partner, no, you'd leave them. People want that. That's romanticism, and this is what I was criticizing 5 minutes earlier. That romanticism about right that romantic relationships can bear the burden of being sort of unconditionally real for us, like the way God was for people. That's just not true, and we shouldn't put that demand on our romantic relationships because they can't sustain it.
so where do you think meaning should be derived? You mentioned kids as one. I think that's a good example.
Right.
You don't think that relationships or marriage is one. So other than kids
No, no,
or
no.
perhaps
I didn't say that. You be very careful here.
sure.
Right. The possibility that it might not be real is not the same thing as discovering it's not real. I think there are people who have real relationships that last their lifetime, and therefore
But you're saying if they don't want to know about being cheated on, then the very fact of them not wanting to know, I thought what you were saying was that that fact of them not wanting to know means that the relationship itself is not truly meaningful because
no,
it
no,
can
no.
be destroyed.
No. I think I'm not being clear here. They would want to know if they're being cheated on because they want to continually test and make sure that the relationship is real. And I think people can, and we can't hold people to a standard of perfection, right? But if people reliably are seeing that something is real and they never come to any good reason to believe it's not real, then it can be sustainingly meaningful to them. However, if you want to say, I want to find something that will never, ever possibly turn out to be not real, which is what I think you're pushing towards, then you're into this question. You're into this question was, well, then what you need is that which is ultimately real. And only that which is ultimately real could never, ever turn out to be illusory or superficial. And of course, that is one of the arguments that religion has made,
Yeah.
that the ultimate source of meaning in life has to be ultimate reality, because only ultimate reality can ultimately guarantee to us that our sense of being connected to something real won't be, right? Won't be
Got it.
disillusioned.
And I want to move on and talk about religion and where you think it fits in with meaning. But
Sure.
let me one final time come back to the point because I do want to make sure that I address and understood what you said. So the exercise in your class where you asked people if they'd want to know if their spouse was cheating on them, and they said yes, and that
Yeah.
they would end the relationship. And I thought the point there that you were making was that because the relationship is not a definite infinite thing, that deprecates, like, how much meaning you could attribute to it. Did I get you? Don't let me put words in your mouth. Is that accurate?
No, what I was getting is that the there's an important identity relationship between getting meaning and being connected to reality. That's what I was trying that was what I was trying to say. And so there's an intuitive understanding that you can't get meaning from something that's not real. That's not the same thing as saying that uh, um, everything is judged to be potentially meaningless. That's not quite the same thing, right?
So I guess what does it show, the fact that people wanna know if their partner is cheating on them? What do we learn from that?
That they want a relationship that is real.
Right.
They right?
Okay.
That's what they
Yeah.
want.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I hope so. So, what purpose should religion have? Like, what purpose
Well,
not does it have, what purpose should it have in terms of finding
Jake,
meaning?
I mean, I've really appreciated your drilling down because this has been very helpful because we basically together, in a very Socratic fashion on your part, to compliment you, we got into this argument. Is it? Yeah, but there's a part of me that wants to this meaning in life thing. It's on the quest to really get the most real things and be really connected to them, realize a real connection to what's most real, and that's right. And that, of course, is what philosophy and religion have, and often they're interwoven together, especially when you look at Asiatic philosophy and religion. They're not clearly, is Buddhism a philosophy or religion? You can waste a lot of time trying to decide that. So I'm going to keep that a very larger category than sort of just Abrahamic religion. But religion, in that broadened sense, has been attempting to give us a way of connecting deeply to what's ultimately real in a way that transforms us so we get better at we get better at discerning, so we're not fooled by self-deception and illusion, and so we get an ultimate guide for how we should make all of our aesthetic and ethical and epistemic decisions. That's what religion is offering. I think religion was fundamentally, sorry, that's too strong. One of the fundamental functions of religion was to try and give people a way of satisfying this longing for a secure source of ultimate meaning.
But do you think so but what do you think? Should people be religious? Are you
um,
religious?
I think I'm religious in the sense that I believe that there is an ultimate reality. I can have a
Are you
relation.
religious in the traditional sense of, like, Christian, Jewish, Muslim? Like, do you go to church or synagogue, or do you believe in Jesus? Like, Do you subscribe to one of the main religions?
Um,
I feel like you're not quite sure.
I don't consider myself a member of any of the legacy religions, but I also don't agree with the assumption that they are even the prototype or exhaustive of what it means to be religious.
And I'm
Um,
not saying they are,
yeah.
but I think that colloquially they are.
So,
And
okay, that's fair then. Colloquially, I'm not religious. But if you give me what the word originally meant, religio, to be connected, and to be connected to that which is sacred, that which we are willing to sacrifice for, because it's transformatively real for us. I do believe I have practices that I do on my own and with other people, therefore properly understood as rituals, that bring me into that right relationship, into that kind of realization.
what is your religion? Like what how would you describe your religion or your connection with religion?
Well, given that more broadened notion, I describe myself as a Zen Neoplatonist, as somebody who's integrating Zen and
Oh,
Neoplatonism together.
what does that mean?
So, Neoplatonism is a claim about how we determine what's real, that says uh, we judge how real a something is by how much intelligibility it affords, how much it helps us to understand and make sense of things. And so, the more something helps us to understand other things and make sense of it, the more real it is. And then it says um, the ultimate source of intelligibility isn't something that we can directly um, conceive of. And you say, well, why not? Well, because of the fact that it is that by which everything is understood. So we don't have anything by which we can understand it. It's like this: the ground of sense making can't be itself something that we can fully understand. So, what does that mean? Well, that means that a Neoplatonist will do rational argument until he gets to the very foundations of what makes things knowable and understandable, and then realize that there is something beyond what he could possibly conceive or understand. And that would be the Neoplatonic conception of ultimate reality. And for the Neoplatonists, this is something like sort of pure relationality. The Zen person is somebody who integrates Buddhism and Taoism together and is continually stepping back and trying to look at what is the source of my experience, what is the source of both my inward and outward experience. And as they go deeper and deeper, they get to this idea of no thingness, that there's a nothingness, which is not sort of a negation. It's that what makes all things intelligible are the relations between them, and relations aren't things. And that whole system of relations and interconnections is not any kind of thing. And it is something that we can realize by breaking through to where all of our experience comes from, but it's not something that we can actually directly experience. And so you put those two together and you get Zen Neoplatonism. The Kyoto school, Nishida and Nishitani, are exemplary figures of that.
Yeah. So between them two,
That was probably very obscure. I'm sorry.
so between them two and you, there's like three of you guys.
Oh, no,
Probably.
no, there's a lot. No, there's actually a lot. Um, there's, I mean, the
So
Kyoto
actually,
school.
let me go back to something. So sorry to cut you off, but
No, that's fine.
so we have more to talk about with Zen Neoplatonism, but to take a step back to religion for a second. So I said, are you religious in a colloquial sense? Are you Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, etc.? And you said, no, that's not really, those are not like, that's not how I think about religion. We shouldn't confine religion to the main religions. We should think about it more globally. So can you, in a sentence or two, define what it means to be, and you did this, but I want to make sure I understand what it means to be religious or what religion is in your view?
So, religion, in my view, and not just my view, but this is one I will take responsibility for, is the claim that there is a reliable sense of ultimate reality that affords us connecting to that ultimate reality in a way that transforms us in the most powerful and best kind of transformation that human beings can go through, and that therefore guides us in all of our day-to-day decisions, moral decisions, decisions about beauty, the decisions about what counts as true knowledge. That's what a religion should do. It's called the triple transcendent.
Let me read that back. So, and I'm going to summarize it in my own way. Um, Religion means that there is some reality, some ultimate reality. We could unpack that, but I'll just
Yep.
take
Yep.
that at face value. There is a reality, and we're able to connect to that reality. And in doing so, we change, and we could unpack that too. Like, what does it mean
Yeah.
transform? But ultimately, that it's through this connection to that reality and through the transformation, maybe the desire to have that transformation happen, that guides our decisions. So the
That's right.
idea that our decisions are directed, or we make decisions based on that connectedness to a certain reality. So what does it mean reality? What if I just say, okay, I believe in planet Earth, I'm connected to Earth, therefore I want to eat and stuff, so I'm gonna go buy food so I can eat. That's my decision. Connects me to the world. Like, so how do you? I mean, I'm guessing the word reality you mean something a little more metaphysical, right?
Um, well, very much so, which is what I was trying to do with the Zen and the Neoplatonism. But like I said, it was very obscure because it's hard to just talk about those things just without any preliminary context. Um, so let's try something. Do you explain the length of the shadow because of the length of the building, or the length of the building because of the length of the shadow? Which?
Shadow is explained by the building.
Right. So you regard the building as more real than the shadow. Yes.
Right.
Right. That's what I
I
meant
will
about.
actually. I would say I wouldn't say more real. I think they're equally real. I think that there's a causal relationship. I think that the shadow is caused by the building blocking the sun.
Right. And so one depends on the other. Is that not the case?
That's right, and it's a one directional.
That's right. And can the building cause things other than the shadows?
Can it cause things other than the shadow? Yes, but the
Yeah.
shadow. Yeah,
So it is the causal source of many things that
right.
are then dependent on it. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to get at. Now, what did you mean when you say the shadow is real? You can experience it, right?
yeah.
What else can you do with the shadow? Can you do all those things that you can do with the building? You can explain a bunch of different things with causal relationships that the building enters into, including the length of the shadow, right?
Along the perimeter and beyond the perimeter of the shadow is light,
Right,
electrons,
and
and
that,
those
right,
electrons
and
are being blocked from
right. But now
the
what you're
space.
doing is now you're moving to light, and you're saying light is more real than shadows because light is the causal thing that can explain shadows and colors. And you keep doing that. I'm getting you to see you keep making the same move, right? You keep going to say, oh, real is what stands behind a bunch of things that I'm experiencing and gives them an integrated, unified explanation, right? That's why we think of
Yeah.
scientific laws as being real, or something like relativity. E equals mc squared. Is that real? Well, you better believe it's real because it means we can take a paperclip of matter and just smash a city to pieces, right? That's really real. That's profoundly real. It explains how the sun works. It explains, you know, right? So much. Is that okay? Now think about this. Okay, where is equals mc squared? Where is it?
Well, it's a principle. It's like saying, where is Zen Neoplatonism? Where is it?
Right, right. But that doesn't mean it's nowhere, right?
Right. It's an idea.
No, it's not an idea. Because if it's an idea, it would only
It's
exist
a,
if people.
yeah. You're right.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a
It
principle. That's the good word.
it describes the action of something. Yeah.
Right. So you have these principles that aren't ultimately things. Things exist and happen in specific locations at specific times. Equals mc squared is not in a specific location at a specific time. It's a way in which possibility is structured so things can be occur in certain ways. It's everywhere and nowhere. As you said, it's a principle and it's more real than the things. It's a no thing that is more real than the things. Is that okay so far as an argument?
Interesting. So you're right. You're saying that because like EMC equals MC squared can be shown in lots of different things, it's more real. I'm not following completely. So sorry, so what's the over, and forgive me. So what's the overarching point you're trying to
The
make?
overarching
Or
point is I was trying to show you that when we did the shadows and things, and then you move to light or you move to the building, you move to what's behind a bunch of individual things that gives them an integrated understanding, right?
and this is meant, but let's say I accept everything you're saying. So what does this then demonstrate to us?
This demonstrates to you my answer to your question about what do I mean by ultimate reality. I mean the deepest
Oh,
principle.
interesting.
In fact,
Yeah.
what I'm trying to get at, and this is what Zen is trying to get at through mindfulness practices, and what Neoplatonism is trying to get at through argumentative reflection, I want to get at the principle of all principles. What's the principle
And
that makes them all possible?
and just to reflect what you said, so how you're defining reality is there's an underlying prime causal factor behind everything is the idea. In the same
Yeah,
way that,
if you broaden,
in the same way that the building causes the shadow,
right, right.
there's something like God or the universe or something that causes us to be here, right?
But you have to broaden because the if you broaden cause to an older notion, because we tend to think of cause as a particular event happening in a particular time or place. And in that sense, E equals MC squared isn't a cause. That's why people, you use the word principle, but it nevertheless makes a difference to reality in a really fundamental way. So if you broaden cause to mean not just events, but also principles, yes, that's what I'm talking about.
So that's how you define reality and
That would be
uh,
ultimate reality. Yes.
ultimate reality. And the idea of religion is to connect to that, and Zen Neoplatonism is a way um, to get there. And it's interesting because I don't know if you agree, but in my limited experience, the reason I keep saying religion colloquially is because typically people, if they say they're religious, that means they believe in one of the three major monotheistic religions. And when people describe what you're describing, they'll call that spiritual, right?
Yes.
But
That's
you disagree with that characterization of those words.
I don't. I mean, the thing is, if you take a look at like the anthropology of religion, religious studies, the relationship between spiritual and religious, even though we make it as a contrast, I'm spiritual but not religious, isn't a very clear one. It tends to refer to sort of how private your religion is. That's what spiritual means, or how public your spirituality is. Right? That's what religion means. Yeah, I don't object to the terms as long as people are understanding that they really interpenetrate in a lot of ways. The thing that matters is that, right, I just realizing that there's an ultimate reality isn't enough. Like, so you go through this process like in Zen where you try and not think it, you try to have it like be indistinguishable from the most basic experience you can have. This is what you do in Zen. You move to this place. Like you've heard of a Zen koan, right? Where you ask a question, right? And the point
Yeah.
is not to give an answer to the question. The point is to keep going. As soon as you give an answer, the point is to go to call into question that which gave you the answer. And you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. But you're not doing this as an intellectual exercise. You're doing this actually with paying attention to your mind. And you get to this state where you're not just having like a proposition in your mind about ultimate reality like we did in a discussion here. You get a direct experience of it. And that's where the connectedness that comes in.
Got it. That's the word. So religion is a tool or a vehicle that we can use to get meaning.
Yeah.
How else can we get meaning? I've heard you talk about the idea of participation and its
Yes.
importance in addressing the meaning crisis. So can you elaborate on how we like what that means to cultivate participation and how that can lead to meaning?
So, I mean, um, the idea of participation is to realize, first of all, that we have a dichotomy between action and passion, or doing something or having something done to us. Um, and that's helpful, but think about some of the most important experiences of your life of realization. Think of when you've had a really significant insight. I'll give you an example, right? I won't mention anybody in particular, but it went something like this. Oh, I thought she was angry, but turns out she's afraid. And you realize your whole way of framing this has been wrong, and you open it up. Now, did I make the insight? No. Did I just passively receive it? No, neither one of those is right. It's I participate in it. The insight sort of emerges. I'm sort of doing, but I'm also receiving. I'm making, but I'm also changing. I'm trying to get at you participate in an insight, you participate in realizations.
So, like, working to understand what's really going on.
Right, but I'm trying to get you to realize that the thing that you're having the realization about is playing as much of a role as you are, right? You're having to. I'm actually having to let facts about her come into my awareness that I was preventing myself from seeing. Right?
You're saying, like, in this example, and I think this is very common, right? I mean, not even common. I feel like most, if not all of the time, underneath anger is fear, right?
Yeah.
Like someone, all these silly things we're angry at. Someone cuts you off in traffic, you get angry. It's because you're worried you're gonna get into an accident. They're gonna hit you, and you're scared of that.
Can I ask you a
Um,
question right now
yeah.
at this point?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, you made a good move underneath, which means in some sense more real, which is fine. We talk about profound, deeper, right? Now, is it enough for you to know that as a fact that you believe, or do you actually have to realize it for it to really be effective in your life?
What to be effective?
So I can say to myself, underneath anger is fear. And I can
Yeah.
even believe that's true. That's not the same thing as getting it, really getting
Yeah.
it in the situation, right?
Right.
Is that tracking
Like
for you?
knowing something intuitively or innately or deeply and consciously versus knowing it abstractly or intellectually.
Well, I would talk about that what you're calling abstractly or intellectually, knowing it propositionally, because all you're doing is saying you're affirming a proposition, right? The other is what I call participatory knowing. You're knowing by participating in it. You're
Like
actually
the reality of E equals MC squared, I would say I only know that. I don't know that from a participant standpoint, right?
That's right. That's right. And one of that's excellent, Jake. And so what Neoplatonism and Zen Buddhism and Christianity argue is that they can give you practices that give you a realization, not just an affirmation of a proposition, but a realization, a participatory knowing of that ultimate reality. Something like the
Got
most
it.
profound insight you could possibly have.
And earlier you used EMC squared as an example of, here's an example of something that's really real. But we're saying that we can't really experience that in the way that
Yeah.
true knowledge requires, right?
So the what you then get on you have to get at is equals MC squared sort of the most real. And the idea is, well, the most real wouldn't just be something like you said, very abstract. It would also go into the very, it would include everything, or it wouldn't be ultimately real. And so it has to go into what kind of principle would make any judgment of realness possible, not just equals MC squared. I was trying to use that to get you into acknowledging principles and non things as real. But think about it when you make those judgments, like when the person is making the judgment, oh, my relationship wasn't real after all. What are they doing? What principles are they making use of? And are those similar to the principles the scientist are making use of? Are they similar to the principles a great artist is doing when they craft a painting, or create some music that somehow makes us feel much more connected to what really matters? Both of these traditions, in fact, I would say a common theme of many of the great religious and philosophical system is, yeah, that all those share some fundamental same principle of realness, and you can
And it's
participate in that.
and the more we would participate, the more we get involved, the more we really understand, and that's what meaning is all about, is
Exactly right.
deeply knowing.
Right. And so let's do, so we now see how we could go through this sort of profound insight. That's how it's really transformative, how it liberates us or saves us. And then as you're correctly arguing, you're realizing, you're like, it's like, oh, but this is going to it's going to give me this participatory connection that's going to give me sort of the ultimate meaning. And then the idea is meaning is sort of your normativity. Unless things are meaningful, you can't make any judgments about them being true or good or beautiful. And then that is the ultimate sort of right goodness for you too. And that's the triple transcendent again: ultimately real, ultimately transformative, ultimately good.
And is that's separate from real, you want to exist after you die and you're making an impact now on
No,
it?
I don't think so, because I do very much want those ultimate principles to exist even if I were to die. I mean, I believe they do anyways, but I would put it this way: I want a universe with those principles at work even if I'm not in it.
Got it. Where does wisdom come into this? Where and how is wisdom
Ah,
working?
and this is the other
And what
function.
does wisdom mean?
First of all, I want to compliment you. I know, like 2 week. I'm really appreciating the the skill that you're demonstrating here, the questions and the way you're threading them. I'm like I'm really I'm really enjoying this.
Thank
So
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
okay,
you.
so let's go back. And I mean, there's a whole. You didn't ask me, and that's not an accusation. We went down another pathway, and that's good. What I think the science is behind meaning in life. What is the actual scientific explanation of it? And we don't have to do that at all. But that is one of the big parts of my work. It has to do with this realizing what most relevant, because relevance is your judgment of how the world and you are properly fitted together or not. And here's the point, though, that the processes that make you so intelligently adaptive and thereby generate your sense of meaning in life are the very same processes that make you comprehensively prone to self-deceptive behavior. The very thing, right, that made you, right, need an insight was that you framed that woman in a particular way, or I framed her in a particular way. I thought she was angry, but she was afraid. Now you say, well, don't frame. Oh, really? So if you're not framing right now, that means you're trying to pay attention to everything. You're trying to remember everything. You're trying to consider all possibilities. You're trying to consider all possible sequences of actions. Each one of those, not even just the combination, each one of those, right? The number of alternatives in them, the number of options in them exceeds the number of atomic particles in the universe. It's astronomically vast. You can't do that. Most of what makes you intelligent, this sounds like a Zen koan, is you ignore most of the information, most of the possibilities, most of your memory, and most of your sequences of behavior. And you're doing it right now. And that is the ability that we still can't give to artificial intelligence, because that is the core of intelligence. That framing ability. Yes.
Like focus.
Not just focus, but
Mhm.
also selection, right? And also shaping. Because what you're doing is you're foregrounding me. I'm very salient. You're backgrounding other things, and then other things are being ignored, and it's flowing, right? My hands are probably more salient to you right now than they were a few minutes ago. It's this constantly evolving, shifting salience landscape. So if that's what you mean by focus, yes. Now that's adaptive. But here's the thing: notice that we can make a mistake. I thought I framed her as angry, but she was actually afraid. That framing that is absolutely central to our intelligence, it's the key ability of our intelligence, is also the very thing that makes us misapprehend, misframe, and misrepresent things to ourselves. And that's how we fundamentally deceive ourselves. Now, wisdom has to deal with this dilemma, which is why you can't solve it with a set of rules. You have to reduce that foolishness, that self deception, but you can't destroy the adaptive machinery. And yet the two are sewn together like this. Being able to do that, that's wisdom.
Being able to like deeply understand and focus or
Yeah.
hone in our attention on the proper thing. Um,
And revise it when needed and get it right.
how do we develop that?
Well, I mean, a lot of it we develop just by exercising our general intelligence and problem solving. But of course, we can do a lot of things to hone our ability to zero in on what's relevant and right and correct, give ourselves, train our ability for insight. But even here, like, oh yeah, just make me more insightful. No, here's the problem with that. The machinery, the processes that make you insightful, where you go, aha, those are the same processes that make you inappropriately jump to a conclusion and make a bad argument. And so, oh, well, I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I want insight. Good. Well, good luck with that. And so what do? That's why you can't use no one practice will make you wise, because you're in these inevitable trade-off relationships. So you need an ecology of practices. You need a bunch of practices that are like an ecology. They have checks and balances on each other. So you can constantly toggle well in all of these irremovable trade-offs that you're facing as you try and hone in on what's real and what's relevant.
Wow. And where does happiness come into this? Like, is there a distinction between is meaning the way to happiness?
Ah,
Does it need
okay.
to be? I mean, do we
That's
ever is
uh,
that like is meaning the object that we should be chasing and not happiness? I'm assuming.
well, this is exactly the reason why I'm sighing is not because it's an excellent question. I'm sighing because it's such an excellent question. Because a lot of philosophical ink and even some philosophical lives have been shed about this. Um, I would say trying my best to bring together as much of the philosophical argument, psychological theory, psychological evidence, neuroscientific evidence, that what we're looking for is some very living dynamical system, a self-organizing system, complex self-organizing system of pleasure, subjective well-being, that thing you lose when you have a kid, and meaning in life. And they have to be sort of they each constrain each other. If you pursue so much meaning that you never have any subjective well-being or any pleasure, your life's probably very challenging. But pleasure without meaning in life, very empty, right? And so a
That
lot
that
of
makes
people,
sense. That
yeah,
meaning is the long also if you kind of categorize them into short term, medium term, long term
yep,
benefit. Meaning is the longest term benefit that transcends even your life. Subjective well being, I'm imagining that means like you're healthy,
yep,
you know,
yes,
that's
excellent.
kind of the medium term. And then
And then pleasure is
pleasure is
immediate.
immediate.
And you know who you just turned into? You turned into Socrates in the Republic and the proposal that we have these three different centers in us. We
Hmm.
have the monster that's about pleasure. We have the thing in the thymos that's like the lion, that's about sort of our honor, our subjective well being, our status. And then we have the man in the head that's about meaning in life and being connected to with reality. You just did Plato.
Oh, oh, okay. Good. So that makes sense. So that we should sort of strive for all three. We should create and pursue meaning, but not at the expense of being miserable now. Like there has to
Yeah.
be a balance.
And so, and then, and now you're starting to get a sense of how Neoplatonism might be valuable to you, right? Because it's about, okay, how can we create an ecology of practice that gets the best optimal dynamical system? So I'm getting the best continual trade off between these three. And then here's the idea: as I reduce the inner conflict and get more of that inner peace, that conflict is one of the driving engines of self-deception. When my pleasure overtakes my subjective well-being or my reasonable pursuit of meaning in life, that's when I deceive myself, right? And so when you start to get those three working together so you have happiness, you also start to reduce your self-deception, which means you start to get more in contact with what's real. And then as you get better at learning real patterns, you get better at coordinating the patterns of your inner psyche. You reduce this, right? You reduce the self-deception. You see more deeply into the world, and then you reduce the self-deception, right? You see how this loops, and that's what Plato called anagogy. This is the ascent out of the cave. That's reciprocal opening. And the thing is, you know how you generally experiencing reciprocally opening, where you're getting that more inner integration piece, and you feel like you're going more deeply into the reality of something. That's love.
Mhm.
That's love.
Hmm. Hmm. What about consciousness? Where does consciousness come in role?
Consciousness is, consciousness is only a little below God in terms of the hard problems to try and answer. Um, so I'm going to have to be more speculative here, but that's not a sin because everybody is very speculative around this question. I'm going to try and be as rationally speculative as I can. I think the first thing, there's two main questions about there's two primary questions about consciousness. What does it do? And then what kind of thing is it? Because it doesn't seem to be like physical things, right? And then there's a sort of a second order question is what's the relationship between those two questions? The function question and the nature question. What's the function of consciousness? What's the nature of consciousness? So I'm going to start actually up here at the second level question, because one of my criticisms of a lot of my colleagues is they try to answer one of the two primary questions on its own, function without nature or nature without function. And I think you can't do that. I think you have to try and answer the two questions in an integrated manner. So
Hmm.
I think what you have to do is you have to start with one of these and build it up and show how it could plausibly give you an answer to the other.
So, and how does where does consciousness play a role in terms of finding meaning?
Well, if you think, as I do, that the fundamental function of consciousness is a higher order form of relevance realization, your unconscious is doing all kinds of relevance realization, and then you pass it into working memory, and you do this another round of filtering it for relevance. Well, why? Well, think about the type of problems that you need consciousness for compared to the ones that you can do almost automatically. So give me something that you can do automatically, almost without thinking about it. What's an example?
Almost automatically. Drinking, eating. I don't know
Yeah,
what.
yeah, eating.
Yeah.
It's very little attention. You can do
Yeah.
it almost like a zombie, right? Now, give me the opposite. Give me an example of something that you got to give your full attention to it, or you will mess up for sure.
Um. So. Uh. You know, work, career. I don't know. Well, it's funny because the things I reach for are things that I do frequently, and that I feel like there is a bit of autonomy, or not
Automaticity. Yeah,
automaticity. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But
Like
for example,
playing chess, right? Playing
okay,
chess.
playing chess. Good, 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 good. Okay, so why do you think? What's the difference between eating? Give me one important difference between eating and playing chess.
Eating's essential.
Right. Okay, but that's not going to help here.
Eating you do frequently. Uh,
Right. But you can do it on. I want to get it. Why don't you have to give it much attention? Why is it easy for you to do in that way? Why is chess hard?
Eating, you're programmed to do it. You know how to do it before
Okay,
you're
program,
conscious.
right? It's a very well
It precedes
defined.
consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. Very well defined, very familiar. You can do it just with the dead hand of habit, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Now, chess, it is really complex. It's ill defined because you don't know what your opponent's going to do, right? And it's very, very messy in a lot of ways because you don't know how things are going to unfold. So you need consciousness. You need to ramp up your relevance realization, zeroing in on that relevant information, because there's a lot of novelty, there's a lot of complexity, and there's a lot of ways in which you're uncertain. It's messy. That's what consciousness is for. We need consciousness in order to ramp up when we're dealing with very ill-defined, very messy, very complex phenomena. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah. So, John, we're running up on time. I want to ask three. Um,
Well,
fa-
we can go a
fa-
little bit longer then, because I wanted to say one more thing about consciousness then.
okay, please do.
The situations that wise people face, do you face these are problems that are really simple, habitual, very, very familiar, can easily be dealt with? Or do you think wise people deal with
No.
problems right? They deal with very complex, ill-defined, messy situations. So one of the ways in which you have to get wise is to train your consciousness, improve it so that it can get better at zeroing in on the relative information in messy, ill-defined, complex situations. That's the deep connection between altered states of consciousness, training consciousness, and the cultivation of wisdom and the enhancement of meaning in life. That's the thread that ties them all together.
Got it. Got it. So that is the connection. Does consciousness shape reality in that way?
I think consciousness shapes the way in reality can disclose itself to you and the way in which it can become meaningful to you. But I wouldn't want to say that consciousness shapes reality, because it's as equally true to say that reality shapes consciousness.
Yeah.
They're looping each other. They're looping each other. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Speaking of that looping notion, is there a limit to the extent that we can understand our minds? Because how can we understand our ability to understand more than, like, if we put the focus of consciousness to study consciousness, it's through the lens of consciousness that we're learning about consciousness, right?
Right. And so this is a very important point. And now you're turning into a Zen practitioner, because what you're saying, no, no, this is really important. I'm going to make a distinction. William James, the great psychologist and philosopher, made this distinction between the I, like the word I, and the me. And the me is what I can, when you ask me who I am, that's what I can see. I can, oh, here's some memories, here's some content. But you know what I can't see? I can't see the eye that is shining. I can't see the seeing. I can only see what's in the frame. I can't see the framing process. Now, what you can say to me is, oh, but I can step back and look at that framing. Yes, you can. And then you're looking at something that's framed and you're still not getting the framing. And then you say, oh, I'll jump back. And that's what I was saying about earlier in Zen, that you keep going back, and then you realize, oh, I can't ever see the seer. That is a no thing to me. And
So
that's
how do
the
we
no.
observe consciousness? So how does one observe or
Wow.
study or look at consciousness if the only lens we have is consciousness itself?
Okay. So now, but here, so first of all, I mean, that realization takes you into something really deep, by the way, when you do that movement, right? And notice how you're getting into something. You're really probing for what's the ultimate reality behind everything. And you're doing it in this, like, I want to get at what's behind it. And that's excellent. Now, this is where you need a distinction between propositional and perspectival and procedural and participatory knowing that we made earlier. Let me give you a distinction that I hope is non-controversial. An example of this distinction. You can't participate in being dead. You can't experience being dead.
Yeah,
You grant that?
right.
That is
Totally,
not the
totally.
same thing as you asserting the proposition that you're immortal, is it? You know you're going to die. You know you're not
Right.
immortal. Okay. So,
That's interesting. Wait, that's very interesting. Well, what
yeah.
you could say is that my well well, you could say that I will never experience death. My consciousness will never experience death. But it doesn't the word immortal means to live forever? It's not that it
Well,
will never.
but that's it. But what I'm trying to get you to see, well, let's just say, I think the only immortality you care about is if yourself and your consciousness are continue to exist. But let me go back first of all, and notice you can have a very good theory, lots of evidence and argument that you're going to die. That's propositional knowing. That doesn't mean that you can have participatory knowing of it. So you can't have a participatory knowing of what causes consciousness, because as you've rightly argued, I would somehow have to step out of consciousness and look at consciousness, but still be conscious. And that's impossible. You're right.
Right.
You can't do that. But that doesn't mean we can't come up with scientific theories about consciousness.
In the same way that we can come up with other theories about things that we can't observe directly.
that we can't participate in, like our own
Yeah.
non-existence. Yes.
Interesting. Wow, there's a lot more we could do there. So, in terms of discussion, but I want to wrap up with a couple of rapid fire questions. Now, these are not
Yeah.
rapid fire. I shouldn't say rapid fire questions. I should say rapid fire answers to really complex questions. The first one is, what do you believe is the ultimate purpose of human existence, if there is one?
To come into a relationship with what is most real to us in a way that reliably affords individual and collective flourishing.
Wow. And what is the one piece of evidence you'd give to anyone trying to figure out their own purpose and meaning?
One piece of evidence? What do you mean? Can you
Sorry,
say?
one piece of advice. What is
Oh,
one piece of advice that you'd give
ask
to
the three
anyone trying
ask
to
the
figure
three
out
questions about meaning in life.
three
Ask
questions?
yourself the three questions about meaning in life.
Awesome. And so John Vervaeke of the Walking the Philosophical Silk Road coming up soon. So
Yes,
everyone should tune into that. John, let me close the recording, but then you and I, if we could wrap up for a couple minutes after, that'd be great.
of course.
All right. And